Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My super special guest today is Susan Ford Bales. Journalist, activist, former first daughter. Wow. You know, one of the things, Susan, that struck me as we've been emailing back and forth about setting up this interview is how down to earth you are. I mean, you're unpacking boxes, reordering your new house. What are some of the misconceptions about you as a former first daughter?
Well, I think all first daughters get, or first children in general, they put you in the regal, queen princessy type mode, and we still have to unpack boxes and move. We just recently moved back to Oklahoma.
So you don't have an entourage?
No, I don't have an entourage. I don't have Secret Service. I change my granddaughter's diapers. I go and take care of her like any typical grandmother when her mother and father go out of town. I move daughters in and out of college dorms. I've got a daughter getting ready to move into a different apartment, and I'll go down to Dallas and probably help slug those boxes too. So, and I love to garden. So, I am a get down, get dirty kind of a person.
Well, it serves you well. It's fun talking with you, and you've made this all very easy. It's a little intimidating at first to think you're, talking to somebody who was so close to the president and in the White House, and you've just made it all very, very comfortable. In fact, your father was actually appointed to be vice president during the turbulent Nixon years and then assumed the presidency. Prior to that time, had you ever thought about what it would be like for your family to be on the national stage?
No, we really didn't. Dad's only dream in his life was to become Speaker of the House, which of course he never got to be. He wanted Tip O'Neill's job. He wanted, that's the position that he wanted. He got to be minority leader of the House, but he never got to be Speaker of the House, and that would have been his dream job. When things began happening during the Nixon administration, we were kind of wondering if we might be the ones who were going to be picked, but we didn't know. The family actually didn't know until actually the night before. So, that was just never out there. I was just another kid who grew up in Washington and went to public school, and, that was the way it was.
You were just another kid, but already, even before your father was named vice president, you'd been targeted, is that right, by the Symbionese Liberation, and they had kidnapped Patricia Hearst. How did that happen?
Well, what happened was when Dad became vice president, in those days, and it was a long time ago compared to today, the vice presidential family did not have Secret Service. The second lady did not have Secret Service, only the vice president. I was in boarding school at the time because I was the last of the 4 kids, and Mother and Dad said, let her go to boarding school and get out of our hair, I guess. And so they found a note from the SLA that said, the vice president's daughter. Well, they didn't know if it was me or if it was the Agnew's daughter. So I just automatically got protection for a couple of months or whatever until things settled down and that sort of thing. Now the vice presidential family has protection, so that wouldn't be as much of an issue.
That had to be a tough thing for you to process as a teenager, having Secret Service detail, knowing you're on this terrorist list.
Well, to me it was kind of a joke more than anything because I grew up with big brothers. I thought I was a pretty tough girl. My stepsons will tell you I can pin them to the floor and do all of those things, but it was more of an intrusion of everything then had to be spontaneous. Any plans that I had made to go play tennis or go to a dance or go on a date that had been made previously had to be canceled, and everything had to be spontaneous. And a junior in high school, spontaneous is fine, but when there's a big dance or something, or you're supposed to go down and visit somebody at college for the weekend, it interfered with my social life, yes.
Well, I can imagine.
I adjusted, but...
Having Secret Service on a date, what's that like?
It's not that bad. I still keep in contact with my Secret Service agents. They know too much, and I never want them to talk. So, we have this pact between us that, they will never tell. And you just adjust to it. You get used to it. And there's nice things about it. You're never alone when you're out and about and whatever. You feel very secure. You get to pre-board planes. You get, there's some advantages to it.
Some good perks.
Yeah, and you'd be out in the crowd, and if some guy that you didn't want to bug you or whatever, they took care of it. So, it works out.
And you had brother detail too that kept you under
It was like
close
having
watch.
my brothers around nonstop, basically.
One of the most controversial decisions of your father's political career was his choice to pardon President Nixon. It happened right after he assumed the presidency. How aware were you, as a kid, of these special pressures on your dad at that time?
I really wasn't, just because I was in high school at the time, and I was more concerned about my grades and homework and what my plans were for the weekend and that sort of thing. So I could see it in his face and his body movement and that sort of thing. But when he came home to have dinner with the family, he wanted to talk about the family. What have you been doing today? How are you doing? Is everything okay? What can I do for you? He was a dad. There were calls at all hours of the night, and he would have meetings. I know there's pictures of him in his pajamas with Dr. Kissinger and Don Rumsfeld and people like that in his pajamas, because you would get calls in the middle of the night and you'd have to make decisions. Those were obvious, and you dealt with it, but he tried to just be a dad to me.
And then your mother suddenly became a well-known national figure in her own right. I mean, we all loved her for her outspokenness. And but as a teenager, did you begin to view your parents any differently?
No, because we really lived a pretty simple life in Alexandria, Virginia. It was a two-story brick colonial house, and I shared a bathroom with my brothers, and my parents had their own bedroom and bathroom, but we lived a very simple life. And Mother has always been outspoken. She grew up with brothers, so if you were going to be heard, you had to speak up. And so she learned how to voice her opinion when she was growing up. And her mother, when you go back, and I've done some reading about her mother was very involved in volunteer work and changing lives and that sort of thing. And so it comes to us all naturally in that sense.
What did you think about your mom's controversial 60 Minutes interview? Because she's talking about premarital sex, use of marijuana, and advice she would have given you if you were having an affair. What kind of reaction did you have to all of that?
Well, I was a little shocked, only because she didn't tell me about it. I think after she did it, it was like, uh-oh, I'm going to be in trouble with Susan. She's not going to be happy about this. So she just thought, let's let it slide under the carpet, hoping that it was not going to make the news that it did. The discussion that Mother and I had afterwards was, let's define the word affair. The word is used very loosely. To me, as a senior in high school, an affair was having sexual relations with a married man.
Yes.
An affair to her, and it just shows you the difference in age, was having premarital sex. So, I thought, well, you're accusing me, one, of having premarital sex possibly in your definition, and in my definition, you could possibly be accusing me of having sex with a married man. So let's define the word affair before we go any farther. And, it did settle down, and I got lots of ribbing from my friends of, the lines of men were, at the gate, dying to get in because, my mother was accusing me of being, I don't know, so.
And the other ripple from that interview, of course, was when she disclosed that she and your dad shared the same bed, which is a wonderful thing, but at the same time, people just weren't used to hearing someone, a first lady particularly, talk that openly.
Well, you have to understand, in the White House previously, in previous administrations, there was the president's bedroom and the first lady's bedroom. And I don't know what bed they ever slept in, but they had separate bedrooms and separate beds. And what Mother and Dad did is they took the president's bedroom and brought their leather, easy boy kind of chairs in there that they had always sat in Alexandria, and had TVs, and it was their little personal den where they could close the doors and have privacy, and then use the first lady's bedroom as the other.
With all the pulls on them, Susan, they must have had to work pretty hard at keeping things normal for you kids.
Well, they did. I was the only one at home at that point. Mike was in graduate school, Jack was in Utah, and Steve was out on a ranch in Montana. So I was the only one at home, and so they really only had one to kind of keep track of, and I was a senior in high school, and I didn't want a close connection between the two of us just because that's typical of a senior in high school.
Sure.
You're starting to cut the cord and let me go and be independent. So, but they did. They kept it as normal as they could. We had dinner, together in the evening. I did have curfews, and I had to check in with them at night. And if I didn't check in with them, then they could ask the Secret Service what time Susan got in. And it was all logged in black and white.
Oh gosh, not many teenagers have that kind of close scrutiny. So that was
Not many parents get that privilege
no,
either.
No. In fact, Hillary Clinton said once it was a relief to her knowing that the Secret Service would be out with Chelsea on some of her dates. When you look back at your White House years, what stand out to you as some of the happiest moments there? Probably lots of them.
Well, there are many. Watching the Olympics and all of that going on in China, I got to go to China and meet Chairman Mao. That was an incredible experience. I would love to return to China and see how it has changed over the years. Celebrating my 18th birthday on the front lawn of the White House. I got to have my senior prom at the White House, which has never been done since. That's my one and only.
Is that for good reason it's not been done since?
Well, who knows? I think we were pretty well behaved. Then there were meeting people that, you don't normally meet. State dinners that were, exceptional, and the entertainment was incredible. But actually having my parents available, because the advantage of having Air Force One is Dad always came home. When he was out campaigning as a congressman, he would go to Grand Rapids for 3 or 4 days, and he would be gone for several days at a time. This way, he always got to come home. So he was really much more available to the family than he had ever been before.
What would it being in the White House? You mentioned having the senior prom. I think it was in the East Room that you had the senior prom. What did that do to your relationships with other high school kids? I mean, were there some tricky negotiations there? Did you wonder sometimes, is this person just a friend because of my special connections?
Well, and I ran into that more even when Dad became vice president. I was a very lucky presidential kid in the sense of I never had to change schools. I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. I went to Holton Arms School in Bethesda, Maryland. I boarded through part of my junior year. And then I moved home because of the Secret Service and security and all that other stuff. But I never had to change schools. My heart has gone out to Chelsea and Amy and all these other kids who moved to Washington and have to change schools, find new friends, the whole 9 yards. Mine were set. So when I saw changes in classmates' behavior, it was obvious to me why, because of who my father was. So it was very obvious. And I'm not the one who came up with the idea of having it at the White House. The prom committee came to me and said, what are the chances? And I said, I don't know. Let me inquire. So, we girls did all the flowers. We did as much of the legwork, just like it's as if it was in a hotel. The federal government did not pay for my prom. The class paid for the prom, and we paid for the band and everything else. So it was just a different location, I guess you would say.
You mentioned Amy and Chelsea. Do you feel a special connection with other first daughters?
I do. It's one of those things that we have our own, well, you can't call it sorority because there are guys too. We have our own club that you belong to, and we do stay in connection with each other. I stay in connection with the Johnson girls. And no one else has been there. Only these people have been there, and they truly understand what it's like to live in the White House, what it's like to live on the third floor, and what room you were in, and how was it decorated when you were there, and who were the housekeepers, and who was the chef. And I mean, those are long-time connections. I stay in touch with my Secret Service agents. I stay in touch with some of the White House staff. Those are people that made it really a home and very comfortable.
That's a nice way of putting it, because we think White House, but to you it was your home.
It's your home. It's your temporary, you know, as somebody said once, it's pretty good public housing. It's the best public housing around, let me tell you.
I guess, and you had challenges there in your White House home. Your mother discovered soon after your dad took the oath of office that she had breast cancer. She later went public with her substance abuse. How hard was it for you as a family to deal with these problems in the public arena?
Well, Mother's breast cancer was about 6 weeks after Dad had been sworn in as president, and it was a total shock to all of us. She went in for a routine physical. They did a breast exam, found a lump about the size of a pea. They said, we've got to, you know, do something about this. We've got to biopsy it. We've got to figure out what we're going to go with next. And you've got to understand, back in 1975, I guess it was, or 76, 75, when you went in for a biopsy, if it was cancer, they proceeded on with a mastectomy. There was no waking up, okay, here are your options. There were no options. There was one option, and that was a mastectomy. My mother and my sister-in-law and I are the only females in the family. We're a pretty male-oriented family. And the thought of losing my mother when I was a senior in high school, as much as I wanted my independence, was a very scary situation. You know, the chances of surviving breast cancer, because hers was at least stage 2, she had lymph node involvement, were not good then. So we're very lucky to still have her today at 90 years of age.
I'll say, and she's doing well, you tell me.
She's doing very well. And, you know, she's a typical 90-year-old woman. She reads a lot. She watches a lot of TV, has friends over for lunch and dinner, but she lives a pretty quiet life.
When she was recovering from her substance abuse from the breast cancer, you actually subbed for her as hostess on White House occasions. What were some of the most valuable lessons you learned from that, being her stand-in for those occasions?
I don't want to do it forever. One of the dinners that it wasn't even a dinner, I guess it was a reception, was called the diplomatic reception. And it was the first white tie dinner reception I've ever been to, because it wasn't a dinner. And it's when you have all the ambassadors from all the different embassies come over, and it's really for dessert and dancing and that sort of thing. And I had to wear long white gloves, and it was just uncomfortable. And you know, I was good, and I thought, I just want to be upstairs in my blue jeans and doing my homework. I think homework's a lot more fun than this, but you get to meet some interesting people, you know. But I didn't want a profession out of it, I can tell you that.
Another difficult time in the White House was when your father lost the presidency to Jimmy Carter. Do you ever look back and wonder what might have been?
You know, I do and I don't. Who knows where we would have landed? You know, Dad had every intention probably after that to retire and work for a university, or, you know, those were his plans in the congressional days, is, you know, to travel and spend, and he promised Mother, he says, we're going to spend time together and we're going to retire and I'll work for a university and that sort of thing. Who knows what would have happened? You know, I was in college at that point. My brothers were gone. I think the world and the United States would have been in better condition, but at the same time, I look at the wonderful relationship my parents have with the Carters.
Yes, it's incredibly ironic.
Yeah.
Did that surprise you at all, that they could embrace each other in that way?
It really did, because the fight for the campaign was just nasty. I mean, it got very, very nasty. And then the two of them become such great friends. So who knows? I mean, you look back at it and say, oh, who knows where I would have lived? Would I have gone to the University of Kansas? Would I have done this? I don't know. Who knows?
But as you were telling me off camera, that was a very different Washington, a different philosophy of politics, that people could have hard fights and then be friends and go out golfing with each other later.
Well, as we were saying, Dad and Tip O'Neill were great, great friends and loved to play golf together. And those are the people that, you know, they would disagree on a vote, but they could go have drinks together, or they could go play golf together. They socialized together. My parents were good friends with, you know, Mike Mansfield and Carl Albert and Tip O'Neill, and it didn't matter if you were a Republican or a Democrat. You were still friends, but those were the days when wives and families lived in Washington. And so in our situation, the husband was not going back to the district, Dad would go back and he would campaign or do whatever he needed to do, and then he would come home. And he was usually always home on the weekends, as much as he could possibly be, because he wanted to see his boys play football on Friday night, and Sunday night dinner was mandatory at our house. you made it home for dinner on Sunday night. So it's a very different Washington now. The congressmen and the senators seem to go to Washington, have apartments, do their business, and then they come home. So you don't have the camaraderie between them, and the socialization and the Congressional Wives Club, and the wives used to do a lot of work with the Red Cross and that sort of thing. And so it's a very different Washington.
Mentioned at the top of the show that you're a novelist. You've written 2 books, Sharp Focus and Double Exposure. How did you come to write these novels?
You know, I am not the one who came up with the idea. They did, and it was one of those things that they said, would you be interested? And I said, yeah. You know, I like to read. I enjoy writing, having been a journalist and a journalism student in college. And they happened to catch me at the right time. We were doing a major remodel on our house, and I still had 1 child at home, so I was able to do a lot of the writing and editing. The nice part of it was the gal that I worked with was wonderful. We would get on the phone, we would talk for hours, we'd write notes and email stuff back and forth, and so we really worked together as a team. The one thing we made sure of is anything that's mentioned historical in those books is accurate. When it talks about dishes and rooms and things like that, is very accurate about the White House.
And these are subtitled The White House Mysteries.
Right.
So how closely was the main character Eve based on you?
Oh, not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
Probably the fun, frivolous one that I would have always liked to have been. So,
have you thought at all of following in the footsteps of another former First Daughter, Margaret Truman, and writing a whole series of these books? You're off to a good start with these 2.
well, yeah, but you know, I don't have the time right now. The Betty Ford Center takes up a huge amount of my time now that I'm chairman of the board, and so I spend a lot of time in California traveling back and forth. And so that kind of has me wrapped up along with a 2-year-old granddaughter. So.
Wow, well, what's her name?
Joy.
Joy, and she brings a lot of joy, doesn't
Yes,
she?
she does.
Susan, recently you and your family were on the world stage again when your father passed away, and we went through and got to see the memorial services on television. It had to be a difficult transition for your family, and yet it had to be a comfort as well to see all these wonderful testimonials that came.
It really was, and you know, we spent many years and many months planning every little detail of it so that when it did happen, we didn't have to worry about it. I mean, we literally put the plan on the shelf and were prepared. Whenever it happened, it happened. Dad's health had been failing, as everyone knows. He was at Mayo Clinic several months before his death. And, you know, he was 93 years old. But the tributes were incredible. It was perfect. Everything was perfect. And besides, I mean, we were all exhausted more than anything. You know, by the time from the time of his death until the time we finished and returned to California, it was about a 10-day. And we were exhausted. I mean, it was long days and long hours, but he got the tribute that he deserved. And not that he would have cared about it. You know, he was not a boastful person.
During his presidency, there was lots of controversy, the presidential pardon of Nixon that we mentioned earlier. Do you think that we're just now beginning to realize how great a president your father was?
Well, I think he's finally getting the credit that he was due a long time ago. I know with the pardon and that sort of thing, not everybody, but the majority of the people disagreed with him. I would say the reason he lost the election to President Carter had to do with the pardon. Now historians are looking back and people are looking back and understanding why he did it. But at least he got that credit before he passed away. And he, you know, saw the op-eds and that sort of thing that said, you know, Jerry Ford made the right decision at the right time. None of us could see it, but we now see it. So Dad knew it all the time. He knew he made the right decision. And that's what everybody loved about him.
How would you like him to be remembered?
You know, I think the best thing is his commitment to the United States, his joy with his family, and his love of God. I mean, and that's really his, you know.
it was clear as we watched your family on television how close you are to your mom. And you mentioned how you're carrying on her work with the Betty Ford Center. Tell us a little bit about what that entails and some of the initiatives that you're behind.
Well, I've been on the board about 15 years, so I didn't just become chairman overnight when Mother decided to resign or become honorary status, actually, or founding chairman. And I was the one who did the intervention on her, or got us together to do the intervention to get her into treatment originally. So being chairman is a lot of conference calls, traveling back and forth to California. We have 6 board meetings a year. We have finance committee meetings on the months that we don't have board meetings, which I'm involved in. And then we have many, many committees, anything from the golf tournament for raising money to the foundation, because the majority of the people that go through the Betty Ford Center, because we are a non-for-profit hospital, can't pay to go there. And even though we are one of the lower price, medium price centers, it's still a lot of money. And most alcoholics and drug addicts have gone through their money by the time they get help. And so we give away more than $11 million a year.
It's an incredible amount.
It's an incredible amount a year. In scholarship, we have a wonderful children's program for children who live in a home with addicted families. You know, it's, oh, you treat children. We're like, no, we treat children that live with addicts and alcoholics so that they know. Children blame themselves. You know, Daddy drank tonight because I didn't get an A on my test. Mommy was taking drugs because I didn't make the soccer team. And kids blame themselves.
Did you go through some of that yourself?
No, because Mother's was so much later in my life and that sort of, so it really didn't affect me as a child. So you've got to retrain the thinking of these children and give them some value. And it's not their fault that mommy or daddy or their significant other that lives in the house or their older brother or whatever. It's not these kids' fault that they do what they do. It's a disease. And if you can educate these kids about it, they have a much better self-esteem.
Got 30 seconds left here. Any chance you'll ever go into politics?
Never.
Never.
Never,
Are you
never,
politically
never.
involved at all? Are you going to be out in the campaign trail?
No.
Thank you so much, Susan Ford Bales, for being here. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.